Should antinatalists congratulate pregnancies? Now, a lot of people have probably clicked on this video thinking, why is he making this video? Seems like a pretty obvious answer. No. But I think there is some interesting stuff to explore here. The most obvious thing when you become an antinatalist is don't procreate, or that's the most obvious message that antinatalism is putting forward. But there are also some slightly less obvious ways that antinatalism would change our behavior. So you wouldn't procreate, but you also wouldn't help someone else procreate. You also wouldn't pay for non-human animals to be bred into existence. Things like this that are maybe slightly less obvious than the billboard don't have children or biological children. Another way that antinatalism would impact the way that we behave, how we as antinatalists interact with the culture around us. So the culture we exist in is obviously going to be slightly different depending on where we are around the world, but by and large it's going to be quite pro-natalist. As an antinatalist, you don't just want to remove yourself from the actual act of procreating, but in some way you maybe want to resist or push back on the culture that helps facilitate or promote it as well. So one way might be to resist certain celebrations, like not celebrating Mother's and Father's Day, or at least not interacting with it or engaging with it in the same way that you would have before. And another way is congratulating pregnancy. So on one level, you might not want to congratulate a pregnancy as an antinatalist because it's not actually something that you think is good. When you hear the news that someone is pregnant, it doesn't fill you with joy, and so why would you want to congratulate someone on that? But on another level, you might not want to congratulate a pregnancy because it plays into the wider culture that condones and promotes and deems acceptable procreation. So there's two things there. There's one more sort of personal thing. It's something you personally don't want to celebrate, but it's also a way of you interacting with and resisting the culture that generally condones this practice. That is basically a summary of where I'm kind of at. I don't think antinatalists should congratulate pregnancies. I don't think it's something that we should be happy about or something like that. So I think antinatalists are broadly going to be in agreement that we shouldn't be congratulating pregnancies, but how do you actually interact with that situation in the moment? Obviously, there are so many different ways that this can happen, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, and please, if there are things that people want to add to this conversation, leave it in the comments below. But I think there are a few things and a few nuances that I can at least put on the table and people can take into consideration. So the first thing I want to say is when someone announces they're pregnant, this can obviously either happen in a group session or in like a one-on-one circumstance. Now, if it happens in a group setting, it's probably quite easy to maybe just fade into the background, not say anything. There may also be like times at work when someone announces it, and I know occasionally workplaces do like baby funds. As an antinatalist, I would probably say don't contribute to those. I think there's a slight nuance in terms of gifts when someone has become pregnant. So if an antinatalist wanted to buy a gift as a way of basically maintaining a bridge with that person, because this is a circumstance where you could burn a bridge with someone, right? You could have a friendship with someone that you don't want to lose, and this particular subject is maybe a sore subject, or it's just a subject you don't really talk about. And so when this situation comes up, you want to do something to maintain the friendship but kind of avoid condoning the actual behavior. One way that you could do that is buy a gift that is only usable by the child, so a toy or something like that. Don't buy something like, oh, you know, here's a spa day, you know, you're going through so much right now, so let your hair down or something like that. It's like, well, no, they chose to go through it completely voluntarily. It was their decision, and it's not something that should be condoned, so I wouldn't give a gift to them. But obviously it's not the child's fault they're coming into existence, and actually if we can, we should try and make their life go better. So I think that's one thing an antinatalist can do. If they want to try and have some sort of positive interaction in this situation, it can be to get a gift that is for the child rather than would be usable by the parents. And I realize I'm going a bit all over the place at the moment. So if we're going to bring it back to like a one-on-one situation, if someone is telling you one-on-one that they're pregnant, that's going to be harder to kind of fade into the background or anything like that. You've kind of got to confront the issue. Now, I personally don't think this is a great time to like raise the topic of antinatalism or anything like that. It does depend though on the circumstance, like who is this person, what relationship do you have with them, stuff like this. Like if they know that you're an antinatalist and you've spoken about it in the past, then it's probably fine, and they probably already know about this topic. It's probably fine to raise it and just say, look, you know how I feel about this, but you know, I hope nothing goes wrong with the child or anything like that. That was a bit of a weird phrasing, wrong with the child, but like wrong with the process, you know what I mean. But if this is someone who either doesn't know you're an antinatalist or it's kind of a sore subject, honestly, I personally wouldn't recommend bringing it up and trying to like engage them on this subject. Like if someone has just announced that they're pregnant to you, this is not to the they're not in the mental like, it's very unlikely you are going to convince them of any form of abortion or anything like that. If they are announcing that they're pregnant, they've probably made their mind up, so they are not going to be in the mindset of changing their mind on this. This is probably 99% of times going to be an absolute lost cause. So I would not bring this subject up in that moment to try and influence them or make a point or anything like that. I can only see that going badly. If you have a relationship with this person such that you think that would go positively, it's your call, it's your relationship, obviously, but I just don't see that going positively if anyone's going to try and do that at that specific point in time. My personal recommendation, if someone doesn't want to have confrontation in that instance, because let's be honest, that really isn't a good moment to have confrontation with someone who presumably you're close enough to, who's telling you that they're pregnant, and you also want to avoid condoning or celebrating or congratulating. So one thing that I think can actually be highly effective and quite an easy way of dealing with the situation is a pivot question. So if someone has just announced to you that they are pregnant, because of the cultural customs, they are probably expecting the next thing to come out of your mouth is going to be, oh, that's great, or congratulations, or something like that. But I think one thing that you can do as a substitute for that, which I think probably won't lead into conflict, although I'm obviously no fortune teller, no guru, I don't know. But one thing you could do is basically ask a question which is neutral, but by asking that question, it shows interest, and so it maybe satiates that person's need for a response in that moment, and it avoids conflict and it avoids congratulating. So what do I mean by like a pivot question? So a pivot question could be, how far are you along, or have you thought of names, or something like that, or do you know if it's a boy or a girl? A neutral question which is basically factual, like asking a bit of information from this person about the pregnancy or about the child they're going to have. I have personally been in situations where I've had a friend tell me that they are going to have a child, and I have used a pivot question, and it has completely avoided any negativity in the situation. So I know this isn't going to be something that's going to work for everyone in every instance, but using pivot questions like that, and if anyone else has any examples of pivot questions that people can use, then I think that can be a really good way of dealing with this subject without causing conflict, but also without showing congratulation or some sort of positive feeling towards it. Simply showing some form of neutral interest in factual things about the pregnancy that has just been announced can help take the conversation down this more sort of neutral direction, and then you can eventually just lead yourself out of the conversation about pregnancy altogether. So hopefully you found that somewhat useful. I know there's probably loads of stuff I missed, and there are going to be people watching this that have had way more experience with this than me. I've only had a couple of instances, just probably because of my age, where I've been in this situation. Yeah, if you have anything to add, let us know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.